Welcome to Transformative Truth podcast. So we are now at episode 101. So we've done 100 episodes of Transformative Truth, sort of the traditional way, where it's just been me talking, and hopefully you've enjoyed that. But as we've been talking about for a while, we're also wanting to connect with other people that I know, and where I know that they know Jesus in a way that's transformative and have stories to tell that I know will be interesting and fun and exciting for you as a listener to listen to. And we're going to get that started today. So we will start with my good friend Andrew Jenkins. And Andrew, welcome to Transformative Truth podcast.
What's up, man? This is cool.
It is kind
This
of
is
cool, isn't
exciting.
it? Yeah. So Andrew,
And
if you could,
episode 101.
yeah,
I
it's a
feel honored for sure.
yeah. If you could just briefly introduce yourself, sort of your marital status and what you do.
Yeah. So I'm married to my lovely, beautiful wife, Katie. We have three little girls. Two, let's see, 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 11-year-old. So life is fun and crazy and all the things with all girls in our family. Almost exact opposite of you, Torben. So,
Yeah,
which is so much fun. And then I am a pastor here in Nashville, and planted a church a little over 3 years ago here in the city. And prior to that, did about 15 years in student ministry.
perfect. So, wanted just to share a little bit about how Andrew and myself we met each other. So, we're back like 3.5 years ago, something along. Is it
Yeah,
more like 3.5 years ago? I think that's about the time.
yeah, 3.5, 4, somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
3.5, 4 years ago, something like that. So, the story was that from my perspective, I'll tell my perspective first, and then Andrew can say what he thought when some weird dude was approaching him. So so I was sitting outside of a coffee shop in Brentwood here south of Nashville, and had a meeting with a different job there, and the person that I was meeting with had left, and I was getting ready to leave as well. So I was packing up my things, and then I just had the clearest sense that I've ever had before since, as far as God wanting me to approach a stranger. I just knew as I got up, I heard God say to me, Tom, I want you to go over and talk to that guy over there. It was like, that's kind of weird, but sure, why not? So I walked over and I saw this guy there with the impressive beard that you can see on the screen there as well. And I was like, oh gosh, is this some sort of like heavy rock fanatic or something like that? Or is he part of some gang and he's going to punch me? I don't know what I was thinking, but I remember just like, okay, I remember just like not nodding you there on your shoulder, and you looked up, and I remember then seeing, oh, he was reading a Bible. I hadn't seen that before because again, you were so entrenched in reading this Bible there, so I hadn't realized that's what was going on. And then I just looked at you and said, I'm not sure why, but God just told me to come over here and talk to you. So that was sort of my side of that story. So
Yeah.
how do you remember that?
Well, first I got a question. Is that normal for you? Like,
No,
go up and
no,
talk to a
no,
stranger? Like,
no.
the Lord does that often?
Yeah, I have not done it like that really ever before. That would be a first in my life. Yeah.
Well, it was one of the first for me that it had ever happened. So, um, but yeah, I remember sitting outside at that coffee shop, and yeah, I was just reading. I don't remember exactly where I was that day reading, but reading my Bible, and then next thing I know, I have this guy tapping on my shoulder, and sat down, and you shared. You're like, hey, I feel like the Lord wants me to share some of my story, and so you started sharing some of your story, which ended up being remarkably similar to the season that I was in,
Yeah.
where I knew that the Lord was calling my family to into some just radical living and stepping away from some things and walking with Him just into the unknown.
Yeah.
And didn't really know what that was going to look like. Never really had met anybody before who had just kind of laid everything down to follow Jesus. Um, and in specifically, I remember talking about just how that connected with family and just
Yeah.
how challenging that can be in family dynamics. And so anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
it touched me, man, deeply.
Remember you asking me a very specific question. I remember once you sort of had gotten over the initial, okay, what on earth is going on here? And I guess we
Yeah,
had both sort of decided that, okay, this was something that God had some sort of purpose with. And I remember you then asking me a very important question, and where it was just like, so Tom, I just need to know, will God provide for us? I remember
yeah,
that question. And I remember just as I sat there and I was like, wow, what a question to ask, right? Where it's just like, we're talking about following Jesus. We're talking about stepping out. We're talking about, as the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard, he talks about, like, you take that jump and you don't know where you're landing. You don't know if you're landing. You just know that you are now free falling with God, right? And that question that I remember just seeing in your eyes, this concern for your family, for your wife, for your three daughters, where it's just like, it's one thing to make crazy decisions when you're just yourself.
yeah,
And I think about that sometimes, like some of the things that I've done as a single guy, like sometimes when I tell stories of how I used to travel, where I would just like, okay, so let's just take this bus here, or 5 bus stops in that direction in some foreign city in Malaysia, right? I don't necessarily, probably wouldn't do that today,
yeah,
because I have a wife and kids that I have to take care of. And if I'm murdered out in some random village out there, that's not necessarily going to be beneficial for them, right? But back then, again, it was just like, okay, whatever. And like trusting God, even making bold decisions when you're single. I'm not saying it's necessarily easy, but it's certainly easier than it
yeah.
is when there is a wife and children involved.
Yeah, you
Um,
and I have talked about this a good bit, but it's that whole idea of it's one thing to count the cost for myself. um, when I have to count the cost for myself and for others that are also in my household, like, and know that the decisions that I make actually do impact them greatly. Um, man, that's a heavy. I think we can call it a burden.
yeah,
That's a heavy burden, to carry and to bear, while at the same time wanting to lead our families in such a way that they also are willing to make really challenging decisions of trust and faith.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. And I know that's part of what we've been talking about, where it's like, when you have kids, and as our kids are getting older, so like mine is the oldest of our children. Again, my oldest is 14. But as we're looking at that for our children, as they're growing up, where it's like if we want them to follow Jesus in radical ways, there's only one place they're going to learn that,
that's
right?
right.
That's in the
Yeah.
home. And just hearing stories and or reading some random book about some lady that went to India, that's fine. But the impact it has when you see mom and dad in this, when you see
Yeah.
them stepping away from something that has more, if nothing else, an illusion of security. I think most security really just is an illusion, but we believe it, if nothing else. We're like, hey, I have a steady income, I have a steady job, I have a place I live, and everything is sort of under control. I have health insurance or whatever it might be. And we build on that. This is my foundation, this is under control, I know what's going on, right? But
Hmm.
then to step out into something, but I think that's what it, I get this question sometimes, again, from parents when I've been doing counseling with parents. And of course, their parents have had the sad experience of seeing their kids as they leave for college. And then as soon as they're away from the home, they walk away, if nothing else, from the
Right.
idea of church. And the parents are left with that question, what did I do wrong? What happened? And in all honesty, what I often have to come back to is that I have to, again, I don't necessarily always say it to them because they might not be ready to hear that. If they're ready, we can talk about it. But it's a question of, but did you model to them that
Right.
Jesus is not a theory? Did you model to your children that following Jesus means that we take leadership from him in every area of our lives? Was that what your kids saw? Did they see in everyday life situations that you follow Christ and you trust his leadership? Because if they didn't, I am not that surprised that they rejected this sort of very theoretical idea of what it means to follow Jesus. That's not a surprise to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think back to that moment that we met and remembering back just kind of what was going on in my life and what we were going through. Um, we were in a season where we knew if we said yes to what we felt like the Lord might be inviting us into, we didn't have any kind of like specific word on it. We just knew that He was calling us into to just following Him in faith, and trusting Him. But we didn't know what we were going to step into. Very very similar. I mean, you see it all the time in the Bible stories, right? It's like, oh, God called this person to go here. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what was next, right? But it was very similar, where we were just like, oh, God, we sense that you're doing this. But we knew if we said yes to that, we were going to walk away from everything, like everything we knew, everything we really had. Um, we were going to walk out of a stable job. We were going to lose a house that we lived in. Um,
Yeah,
and
because
we were
in
going to
your case,
probably,
your housing was tied to your employment, so you knew
yeah,
again this was a double whammy for you. I leave the job, I also make my family homeless.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And three little girls, man, that's a tough sell.
yeah,
and so yeah, we're losing an income, we're losing our home, but then also we knew that in doing this, we probably were going to lose some of our community around us
yeah,
too. We didn't know what that was going to look like totally, um, but we knew what the Lord was asking of us was to trust Him,
yeah.
and to step in faith. And I think back on that, and I just remember meeting you and being filled with this confidence of like, oh, God, you like this thing that I have heard stories about, and this thing that this kind of faith that people that I read about, like, you're still that same God.
Hmm.
And for the first time in my life, my wife and I, we stepped out in faith, doing something with the Lord, trusting Him in a way that, one, we'd never experienced before, um, but two, in ways where it was truly, whoa, we're laying everything down,
Yeah.
and we have no plan B.
Nope.
Our only plan is trust. That's it.
And I think that's what's so remarkable about it, because again, I think it can be easy to listen to this and be like, okay, yeah, but I'm not like that. I don't have that kind of full assurance. I don't, and that's the thing. When I sat there and shared what I shared with you, was I in a place where absolutely everything was firing on all cylinders? Was I in a place where I knew exactly what was going on in my own life? Absolutely not.
Yeah, you were really
Like,
honest about that
yeah,
day.
like again, I didn't come at this or share from a perspective of, yeah, totally, everything is perfect and everything is just the way I want it. But what I was able to share was just honest stories of provision,
Yeah,
honest stories of God coming through, honest stories of God providing finances that we needed in that season. So when we came to Nashville 9 years ago and had nothing, again, we had no idea. We'd just been told to move here. We didn't know where we were going to stay. We didn't know what jobs I was going to end up getting. We had no idea. We didn't know a single soul anywhere, and we started just from that perspective, right? And we quickly saw that Jesus was inviting me into driving Uber full time, so I was doing that. But I was like, God, this can't provide for my family. And I remember
yeah,
that how Jesus gave me a couple of challenges, and again, that's what He'll do. And what we do with those challenges will determine the level of intimacy that we get. Sometimes I talk to people and they're like, "Oh, I want to experience what you've experienced with God," and I'm like, but there's a cost to it. Are you sure you want this?
yeah.
Because there are two challenges He said. He said, A, I will show you that I will take care of the rest of your needs. You do what you can do with Uber, I'll take care of the rest of it, whatever the rest of it may have looked like. And
Hmm.
secondly, He wanted to show me that, hey, even though now you're a nobody taking people from A to B in Nashville, you don't have a position, you're not a pastor, you're not a teacher, you're not a missionary, you're not a counselor, you're just a nobody. I will show you that I'll still do ministry through you. So those were the two things that Jesus invited me to and that I said yes to. And that started that season that I was then able to share with you about a few years later, of provision, of
Yeah,
miraculous provision, of God coming through, of anonymous gifts, of random Uber passengers sending us $500, of people putting money in my pocket at church that I'd never talked to, and all sorts of things like that worked out like that. So do you remember how that affected you as you were sitting there waiting, sort of like, okay, are we ready for this? Are we going to do this? Are we going to step out? How did those stories, because the Bible talks a lot about our stories, right? We even hear in Revelation that we defeat Satan. Part of what we do
Yeah.
is through the words of our testimony. And some people misunderstand that and think it always has to be some like salvation testimony. No, it's your testimony of who God is. It's
Yep.
you testifying to his character. And that's, of course, what I was doing there for you as far as testifying to when God says he'll provide, he is serious. He will actually do that. You're not going to lack what you need. It doesn't mean you have everything you want, of course, but you will not
Totally.
lack what you need. But do you remember how that affected you when you heard some of those stories there?
uh, my first reaction, I remember my first reaction was like, "Ooh, I think I'm going to do this." It's like, I'm not sure this is good, but I think I'm going to do this. I remember that kind of being my first reaction, and then I thought, my wife's going to kill me. That was the second thought. But then I remember I went home and I shared with Katie about meeting you that day, and I said, and Katie, let me tell you, like, the testimony of what he shared with me and just his life and the way that he and his family live and the provision that the Lord has given and just shown up in beautiful and radical and generous ways. Like, God's just been so present and kind. And I remember sharing that with her, and she said to me, she said, "I don't think I've ever heard of God doing that anymore." And I said, "Yeah, I think he still does." and and we both had a new confidence to run, um, and a confidence to just fully trust. Now, was it easy? No, by no means. Um, I held on to your testimony, and I also held on to one other scripture. And it's really several times kind of mentioned throughout the book of Psalms, but it's just that phrase that David would often pray, where he was like, "Hey, those who wait on the Lord will not be put to shame." And it just that replayed over and over and over and over again in my mind. And just remember the Lord. Every time I would find myself in a place of doubt, he would reassure. He goes, "Hey, those who wait on the Lord will not be put to shame." And I just kept replaying that. And ultimately, now again, did the Lord show up in like extravagant, crazy ways of like lots and lots of excess? No. But he showed up and he provided everything that was needed at the exact moment that it was needed. And he was teaching us, he truly like walking us through a journey of what it means and looks like to trust in him as provider when we don't have a backup plan.
Yeah.
You know, I think total like so often when I have these conversations with people, we've got too many things to fall back on. And I think when we have all these backup plans, it's really easy when everything runs like when plan A runs out and it feels like there's nothing left. Our It's really easy to then start pulling on plan B, plan C, plan D, like go all the way through the alphabet. You know, we've
Exactly.
got all these other securities and comforts and backup plans and all this stuff. And yet when you actually don't have that and the Lord has stripped all those things away from you, because, and again, oftentimes because you said yes to him to do it, he'll take you on that kind of journey where you can't trust in the next thing because the next thing is only him. And so it's just like, oh, like this is the place that I turn. And he taught us that. And man, it's been that kind of life for us for the last three years, 3.5 years, since we met. We've been living that kind of journey and have so many stories of the Lord's provision and so many stories of the Lord showing up and sometimes in extravagance. You know, even Torben, you know, like recently, um, we never saw a check for $250,000, but the Lord took care of a bill for a hospital surgery that my daughter had to have. That was $250,000, and and we didn't know where it was going to come from, but there was no way we could pay it.
And
that we
I
knew the Lord
remember
was
I
going to
remember
provide.
us talking about that, and it was one of those conversations there when so. And Andrew and I, we meet for lunch once a month. So we've come to that place where we don't have to talk about where we meet or what we're going to eat, because it's always the same place and the same food. But we just have decided that we meet once a month. And I remember having that conversation there, talking about that with your daughter needing to have that surgery, and this absurd amount of money, right? Where it's just like, again, $250,000 is of course an absurd amount of money, and what do you do with that other than, in our case and in your case, trust,
Yeah.
right? And I remember sitting there, and it was one of those conversations where I remember I had that thought. I was like, I wish that more people had been right here to just hear just this conversation, not because of us, but just because of what that could hopefully, and as they hear this listen to this podcast as well, hopefully challenge people to, that no, this is not just something for people who lived hundreds of years ago. This is not just for people that you read about in the stories about missionaries who went to India, Africa, or
Right.
whatever. This is not just for people that you may hear stories about now through different missions agencies about what's taking place in Iran, India, or Saudi Arabia, or whatever. No, this is for you right
Right.
here, right now. That Jesus is inviting his children to get out of the water, on the water with him. This
Hmm.
is today. This is not past tense, and it's not something that involves a plane ride. It's right now, right there. And I remember sitting there with the exact same confidence that you had, even though that's foolish. Again, this foolishness, and that's what we're talking about. Following Jesus in these types of ways is foolish. Like
Yeah.
to be completely sort of calm about a $250,000 bill is silly. That makes no sense. Again, you probably shouldn't be calm, or else there'll probably be some people who think you should be institutionalized in a slightly different hospital if you're that calm about a $250,000 bill. But it's this kind of trust where I knew and you knew. That doesn't mean we're not super people. It doesn't mean that there are not moments where it looks scary. It doesn't mean that there are
Yeah.
not moments, and I know that's true for you as well, where it's like, okay, how on earth is this going to work out?
Right.
This is real life stuff where you're wrestling with those types of fears, but learning as well to take those fears captive, not allow them to run things. Something my wife and I do on a daily basis when we talk and pray in the situation we find ourselves in. What do we have to do all the time? Take fears captive.
Yep.
Take that lasso out. Catch that fear that says, you're screwed. It's not going to work out. God's going to abandon you. Yeah, he's provided so far, but this time, this was a stretch too far,
Right.
right? But I remember that, and then seeing just the confidence that, of course, God was going to provide for that. And it's that
Yeah.
kind of confidence that I know God is wanting so many more of his kids to just step into, right? But what do you think it is that stops people from getting to experience God in these types of ways, and even to experience that kind of confidence in what God will do? What do you think it is that's stopping people from experiencing that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably a number of things, but I think you hit fear pretty spot on. Like there's the enemy's really, he has one thing to really tug on. And the one thing that he really has to tug on is any fear that we let sit. Um, and so as we let fear kind of sit and marinate inside of us, that gives him a place, right, to begin to do things and to move and all these things. And so I really think a lot of it is that, but I also think, again, like I think there's this. It's almost as if, because we're feel so far removed from the story of God, that none of us actually, well, very few that I've met actually can place themselves in the narrative of what is God doing and what has he always done? Who is he? It's that whole, like, we put him in this box and we say, well, he's only as big as this, or you put him in a box that says he's only as big as even the book that he's
Yeah,
in. Well, the book that he's in is pretty massive,
yeah,
and it's got some pretty radical stories, and he's still the same God. And I think we've just gotten so disconnected from that he really is the same one who did all of the things that you read about. And yet what I found, at least in myself, was that all of what I knew about the Lord was very much head knowledge. There was not a lot that had actually transformed my heart, which is why I love what you're doing with this podcast, Torben, because it truly is. Like, if this is true, then it should change everything. Like, if Jesus is who he says he is, and what I have found is that he is exactly who he says he is. Yet often it looks like us having to come to a place where truly, I mean, and again, like, we read it and we hear these things in the Bible to lay our lives down, to take up our cross daily and follow him, all these things, to put total faith and trust in him. And we say these things, but most of us don't know what it looks like to remain in the place of waiting. And I think we've got, at least what I've seen, and just some of the people that have been here at Maranatha with us, is that for the most part, a lot of people have grown up in environments that everything was there and everything was secure and everything was, they didn't really ever have to trust in the Lord to do anything. So he became just another thing. And I think, like, when I look at the church, here in America especially, but that's the context I know the most. So when I look at that, it's like we've not had seasons and times in our life where if we truly put, like, if we truly had all the resources that ran out, would God still show up, and would he still do what he said he's going to do through his people and through his church and for his people? And none of us have actually said yes to living that kind of life. And so it's just really, like, I've just seen this, like, kind of this almost, I don't want to necessarily call it weak discipleship, but maybe that's it. where following Jesus looks like him at best being a plan A, with a lot of other plans behind it. And at worst, maybe he's a plan B, C, D behind whatever their plan A is. And so I don't know. That's some of what I've seen, and I think we need more testimonies of the Lord and his goodness and his provision, and we need people who are bold to say yes to, hey, the Lord's asking me to go share this with this person. The way that you did for me, I could say this confidently. I'm not sure I would be sitting here having this conversation, or be walking with the Lord in the way that we are now, and trust and provision from the Lord, if you hadn't have come over to my table that day. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's desperately needed.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so wild, right? That it's easy to be so negative and look at all the things that are not going right. But in this case, one little act of obedience then actually had a large ripple effect, right? So, like, that you and your family are now engaged in this church and meeting with families and individuals in all these different situations. And all it took was just one act of obedience. And we talked about that in a podcast a few weeks ago with my friend from Denmark that sent me a message where she confronted me on that I hadn't responded to something she shared with me. And she said that had hurt her feelings, and how that then led to a conversation that you and I then had last time we met, and that led to some more conversations that you ended up having with some people, and the same sort of thing. And I think that's something that I wish that we could just focus a bit more on, that yeah, sure, we live in a world that's filled with all sorts of bad and evil, and it's easy to get hung up on that. But we also live in a world, as we always will, where one act of obedience, one act of faith, one act of courage, one act of putting it on the line for God can have a positive ripple effect, where these dominoes start falling, and you don't even know who this is going to affect down the line. And
Right.
all you did in that moment was just say yes, right? Where, as you're talking about again, I was just thinking about that this invitation that's there from Jesus, and we just had a family devotion about that the other day again with Peter there, who gets out on the boat. And I've heard, and I'm sure people listening probably have heard lots of sermons about Peter, and then he didn't have enough faith, and then he started sinking, and Jesus rescued him. But I'm like, seriously, are we seriously criticizing Peter? The only one out of the 12 that had the courage to get out of the boat and just go for it. Are we
Yeah.
seriously going to waste our time criticizing him? Are we really doing that? I just remember the first time it sort of dawned on me when I heard sermon number whatever about this. And I'm like, what are we doing? Why aren't we talking about these other dudes that were sitting there in the boat and were so paralyzed by fear
Right.
that they never stepped out? What a story Peter has. What a story Peter has to talk about the rest of his life. And again, every time he was near that lake, he would just look out and be like, yeah, I got to walk out there. It's pretty cool, right? And it's that where it's like, if we want that kind of life with Jesus where we get to experience him, we got to get out of the boat. We got to actually be, as you talked about, again, if we always have plan B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever, it's very difficult. And that's, of course, why is Jesus anti-money? No. He talks about, though, the problems with the love of money, because, of course, it creates these illusions of security and control that makes it very, very difficult for people to encounter the living Christ. And I remember sitting there with a lawyer once, and we were sitting there and having coffee, and we were talking about following Jesus. And his brand new Mercedes Benz was parked outside of the cafe. And he looked out at that, and he looked at me, and he said, but that one, pointing to the car, that's part of my problem, isn't it? And it was one of those where Jesus didn't want me to respond, so I didn't. I didn't rescue him out of that. I also didn't tell him, yeah, you have to go and sell it for sure. That was not really the point. But I think he was seeing something, that this level of abundance and money and stuff, and yeah, then it's going to be quite difficult for you to experience Jesus in your life, because you rely on yourself, you rely on your own stuff, you rely on your own plan. And that was the question I got from another friend of mine years ago, sitting in South Africa on a mission trip, where he's just like, Tom, I see your life. I see how you know Jesus. I see you carrying his presence. What's been the price tag? And I love that question, right? Where it's like, what's been the price tag? Because if you get to see and experience the actual life of Jesus pouring out of a person, this is a person who carries a price tag. This is a person who has experienced things that have been really, really difficult with Jesus. So, Andrew, when you think of that sort of question again, sort of what's been the price tag, what would you say for you has been the price tag? So you get to experience God providing $250,000 to take care of your daughter's surgery. But what's been the price tag? So you didn't have to pay the bill, but there's a price tag to living in the kind of way where that kind of trust in God and his provision is part of your reality. Because nobody gets there without it costing something.
Totally. And yeah, I think the cliche but true answer is it really has cost everything. But at the same time, like the value and the reward of following the Lord in the way that we have is unlike anything I've ever experienced before, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Like I think back, there's a couple of things that came to my mind as you were talking just a second ago. You brought up the text about overcoming by the power of the blood and the word of their testimony. But there's a third part of that text, and the last part of that text says, "And they did not love their own lives even unto death." Right, and and what I've seen and what I've learned is that there is this love of our own stuff, and when that word life there, I think in the Greek it's the word I'm going to butcher it. there's two different words in the Greek that can be used. One is Zoe life, which is like life in the spirit kind of life. The other is like your physical life. And that word there is the one for your physical life. And and it's like these people were so willing to lay their life down, the comforts of their life for the reward of following the Lamb, that they would lay it down over and over and over and over and over again. I think about in Revelation, and it's either 4 or 5, when we get a glimpse into the throne room, and you've got the four living creatures and the heavenly beings, and they're all looking at the throne, just singing holy, 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 chanting holy, holy, holy. Have been from the moment they opened their eyes. Those things were created at some point, which is crazy to think about. And when they were created, they opened their eyes, and the first thing that they saw was the throne of God and one seated on that throne. And their immediate response was holy, holy, holy. And what's cool, they've never gotten tired of it. They're not bored. But then there's another group that comes on the scene, and it's these 24 elders. I don't want to go into the theology of who they are and all the stuff, but like they seem to represent man. And and you've got these 24 elders who are seated on 24 thrones around the throne. And it says that when they hear the holy, holy, holy chant, cry of heaven, their response is worthy, worthy, worthy. And they take off their crowns and they lay them at the feet of the throne, the one seated on the throne. I was thinking about that the other day and realizing that the crown that they're wearing is the crown that Jesus himself actually placed us on us. Like, it's a crown that we receive, right, from the Lord. And yet their response was, whoa, we have seen one, and we have laid our lives down for him, and he is worthy. And what's cool to me about that is you see man chanting worthy and the heavenly beings chanting holy. And I started to realize that worthy costs something. Like, there's sacrifice behind worthy, because you and I, Torben, we've seen the things that the world has to offer. The heavenly beings have been looking at one thing. Those four living creatures have been looking at one thing over and over and over again, and they say, holy, 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 holy. Like, it's all they can look at and say. But we look at all the other things that the world has to offer, and our response is, there is only one that we've actually looked at and found to be worthy. And our worthy costs us something, and it actually costs us laying everything down for him, for his worth. And those 24 elders, they'll do it again. Like, it's cool. Like, there's just this response of heaven of like, oh, we're going to take the crown off, and then he may place it back on us again, and then we're going to look at him again and say he's worthy and take off the crown again. So to me, like, while yes, it has cost so much, what I've learned and what I've seen, like, maybe to answer that question is, yes, it's cost me my name. Yes, it's cost me any kind of like any kind of name that I'm trying to build for myself. It's cost me my pride. It's cost me financially. It's cost me time. It's cost me energy. It's cost me relationships. The reality is, what it has cost me does not even come close, nowhere close to what he is worth. And so for me, man, I look at that and I'm just like, whoa, Jesus, I have seen what this world has to offer, and there is nothing or no one like you. And so I continue to choose him, man, and just continue to come back to that place of there is only one found worthy.
I love that. And that's what's so interesting, right? Again, with this challenge from Jesus to, hey, count the cost, count the cost. And that's where I have some issues again. So like as the listener knows, I've worked in global missions all over the world. And there are certainly times where I've seen things that have been done and we've called it missions, but where we didn't tell people to count the cost. And I don't like that one bit. Again, I want us to be honest that what we're sharing is going to cost something. It's going to cost everything. I
Yeah.
think of the ladies I was blessed to meet when I was in India, and I was there during the week. So all the men were at work. So there was the women that came to some of the gatherings where I was then asked to speak. And we were in a place that is known as, in the northeastern part of India, that's known as the graveyard of churches and graveyard of missions. One of the hardest places in India to do any kind of Christian ministry. There, it has real consequences. And I just remember this lady, and she came up to me, and she was this short little Indian lady there in a beautiful, beautiful clothing that told me that, first she told me that she'd walked for an hour and a half to come to this gathering. And then through an interpreter, she told me her story of how she had come to know Jesus, and her husband, who's a Hindu, every time she comes home from any gathering with Christians, he beats her. He physically beats her, and she has to recover, but then she goes out again because she's gotta be with the brothers and sisters. She's gotta hear more about Jesus. She wants to learn more. When she told me that, and the translator shared what she had shared, I just stood there and wept, and I said, like, why on earth am I the one up here? Like, why am I talking? And she looked at me sort of puzzled, and just the humility in her. She was like, no, I'm really looking forward to hearing what God has to say through you. And I was like, okay, here we go, right? But it was there where the cost for this lady, she was in real danger of being killed for her faith by her husband. But she was like, there's no way I'm not doing this, because this is worth everything. This is what Jesus talks about, those different stories we've talked about. It was like, again, there's this field and there's this pearl, and I don't care what it'll cost. I want it. I want it so bad, everything into the middle of the table. And I think of my own life, those times where there's been no plan B, there's been no plan C. My life changed radically the very first time where, and listeners will know the story, where Jesus called me at a missions conference in the Netherlands. In my case, it's 24 years ago. But I remember that I sat there and I'd met a person who had told me about a youth with a mission, discipleship training school, and this young lady, she had this just radiant relationship with Jesus I'd never met in anyone before. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I want that. And I guess she had done a youth with a mission, discipleship training school. I had no clue what YWAM was or DTS was. So I just like, I'm all in. So when I came to that school, 26 students, I was the oldest student by far. And I came there, and I remember I had in every possible sense withdrawn every dime I had ever earned. And I pushed it into the middle of the table, and I had said to Jesus, Jesus, either you show up or. And then that sentence ended there. Because I had no clue what would have happened if he hadn't shown up. If he hadn't shown up and started showing himself to me and allowing me to begin the journey of getting to know him in the way that I now know him today. If he hadn't shown up, I would have wasted every dime. I'd have stood there as an absolute idiot. I remember I was 1 year from finishing 2 degrees at a college I was attending in Denmark. Do you think absolutely every person told me that I was being a freaking idiot? They're nice people, most of them, and I guess they didn't use that language. But they were like, what are you doing, Torben? Just finish that 1 year. Just finish it. Then you have 2 bachelor's degrees and you can do that Jesus thing. But I was like, can't do that. Because Jesus is calling me now. And that's the way that he called the disciples. None of them were told in 6 months from now, in a year from now, when you finish that degree, when you've done this, when you've done that, then. No, follow now. This invitation, it's not going to happen tomorrow either. This is right now. Are you in or you're out, right? And that's those times where everything is on the table. And as we talked about, then the more our family grows, then of course that gets more and more complicated.
Yeah.
But it's the same.
I think about, I think about, I mean, what you were just saying. You mentioned, like, hey, we don't want to, like, sugarcoat this. Like, it's tough. It's challenging to live this way with the Lord. But one of the things that I've found, that I'll bring up 2 things real quick, but one thing that I've found is that while I don't have all the same securities that I once had, Man, Torben, I feel more secure than I ever have in my life. Like, because it's not rooted in things that are here. My security is totally rooted in one that has stood the test of time and has proven to be faithful. Every time I've leaned on him, put the full weight of my life on him, every time he has shown up and supported the full weight of whatever I was giving him. Every time. And so like I look at it and it's just like, whoa, like he is the one that I can trust with absolutely everything. And I can trust that he's going to show up, that he's going to be faithful. He's going to be who he says he is. And so to me, like I look at my life and man, I feel more secure than ever. Like, it's just, it's wild and it makes no sense. I mean, we read that scripture about a peace that passes understanding, and people are like, what is that? I don't understand that. It's like, well, you understand that when you have placed every bit of what you have in him.
Yeah.
Like that's the only way to understand that.
Exactly.
When you don't have a peace that can actually come from anything else or anywhere else, the only way to actually understand that text is to actually live it and say, Lord, I am giving you everything and I have no backups. And then he provides a peace that passes understanding as he proves himself to be who he says he is. And then the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking a second ago is Jesus's invitation was not one of sugarcoating things. It was, hey, follow me and you will take up your cross and follow me daily. And when we read that and hear that in our context, we're looking at that text on the backside of a cross that became beautiful, right? But to them, man, when Jesus says take up your cross, the only thing they heard was, you're asking me to follow you and to trust you with my life and to pick up an instrument of death. Like that's literally the only thing that's in their mind. An instrument of death and suffering, right? And yet his promise is, if you give me your life and you die, you will find life.
Yeah. No, but you're spot on. I love what you said there again, that the only way for this to become our experience, and that's the whole point of transformative truth. Again, we're trying to share these stories with people so that people can hear, this can be my experience as well. This is not for some kind of superstar person out there.
Right.
And like just a few days ago, again, I had one of those days where my thoughts and fears and questions and that type of stuff had just come to a T. And I had one of my shouting matches with God, and I was just sitting and just yelling and screaming in the car. It doesn't mean that you live in this constant sort of like Zen-like kumbaya, everything is always super peaceful. And again, that's part of what we talk about at times with David, a man after God's own heart, who's trying to show us that with his anger, with his calls for vengeance. And if you want to read Psalm 109 that we've talked about before, it's probably my favorite of that, where he calls down all these very specific curses on this man who has somehow wronged him, right? So it's not that there's not room for your thoughts and your feelings and all of that, but all of it is part of, as David does over and over and over again, he shares all his anger and wrath and his feelings, and then there's 2 verses where it says, but I trust in you, Lord, right? Like he arrives at that. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about this sort of like that you're constantly just never having thoughts of fear or doubt or frustration, or that you never have moments where it's like, okay, God, hey, tick, tick, tock, tock, right? Again, there's a deadline here. Something should happen. Why hasn't it happened? Why are you seemingly late, right? Again, all of that is also a normal part of the experience of everyone, every saint that has ever followed Jesus in these kinds of ways. I remember when Mother Teresa died some years ago, and they found some of her journals, and people were horrified to see Mother Teresa sharing about her doubts. And I'm like, what did you expect? Like, she's a regular human being, and it's not like she's from some other planet. Like, so of course Mother Teresa had doubt living there in India, doing all the insane things she was doing. Just because you guys put her up on some crazy pedestal where there was no room for doubting, it doesn't mean that, of course, she's a real person. Of course,
Yeah.
she was going to have those moments of wrestling with God. I'm like, what are you doing, God? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you helping with that? Why aren't you meeting me in these ways, right? Of course, she's a regular human being like the rest of us. And the calling to discipleship is for regular people. It's not for people, again, I remember for me, that has been my biggest surprise, like where it's like, I'm a very emotional person. I'm a very, at times, aggressive, loud, boisterous sort of person. I'm not a particular, like, kind, quiet, contemplative type necessarily. I'm passionate and crazy, and God called me. But when you look at the disciples, of course he did. Why wouldn't he? Peter was like me. Again, John was like me. Again, these angry people there with all their issues. And then we had some of the sweeter types, and then you had a dude like Bartholomew who never said a word. I'll always pick on Bartholomew, and someday he'll explain to me why he'd never, in 3.5 years of following Jesus, said a single thing that apparently was going to.
He's going to be the wisest of
Yeah,
every one
probably.
of them, by the way.
Yeah, he might be running the whole New Earth project, right? Because like he is just the essence of wisdom. Because he just decided, I'm just going to let everybody else talk, right? And remarkable dude, right? I want to ask one more question here, Andrew, and then we'll sort of wrap up some things. But how do you know that it's Jesus? How do you know that it's God talking to you, calling you, leading you, guiding you? How do you know that it's him and not just your own feelings or Satan or whatever? How do you know that? How do you know that it's God?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think one I hear a lot when I'm kind of sharing some of my experiences and some of the things that we felt the Lord inviting us into, and just invitations from Him. I think for me, one of the ways that I kind of search that out and just kind of discern, is this the Lord, or is this me, or whatever. Obviously there are times where, if I'm honest, like, it's confusing. I'm like, oh God, I'm not sure. uh, but one of the things that I've learned is that when I sit on something that I feel like the Lord has said, whether it's something that's really simple or really, really hard, okay, well, either one, the reality is his word should bring a level of peace. And so for me, I will sometimes, I'll sit on something before I'm if I'm honest, like I'm unsure on that one. And I'll sit on something until I've sat on it long enough that the Lord will bring His peace to the situation, or His peace to my mind or my heart. Um, and usually that's when I can confidently then say, okay, that was the Lord. That was His invitation. That was His voice moving me to do this. I think the other piece is, man, I have to remain in Scripture. That's just personally. I hear people who sometimes they're not, and they'll hear from the Lord really clearly. But for me, um, I need I need I'm a slow operator, Torben. So I'm like, okay, God, give me a word, and then I need you to confirm the word, and then I need you to connect the word to something else. And so for me, I'm pretty slow. Um, but I would say, like, when the Lord confirms something with Scripture, and He ties it to the word, to His already spoken word, it gives me confidence to
Yeah.
run. And so I have to stay in the Word, to really be able to discern clearly. Maybe not to hear from Him clearly, but to definitely discern clearly. I have to stay close to, all right, Lord, what have you already spoken? And recognizing that the words He has already spoken are still living, and they're still active, and they're still speaking to me today. These things are real, they're true. If words are His, then they will speak across generations. And so for me, like, I have to stay in that place of just kind of coming back to that and discerning that. But Torben, it's getting quiet, like staying with Him long enough. Um, it's coming to oftentimes the end of any plans or backups that I have. I mean, it's all of those things kind of wrapped together where it's like, okay, God, now I've heard from you and now I can move with confidence. So I don't know if that answers even what you were asking.
Absolutely.
But
I love that. I was thinking about as well with that. Also has to do with trust, right? It has to do with
totally.
trust that's built over time. And how do you build trust? You build trust based on shared experience. That's one of the
Yeah,
ways that you build trust again, where it's like if you don't have not experienced anything with a person, it's very difficult to trust them. If you've not seen over time that they are trustworthy people who do what they do
right.
and say they do what they say and they follow through, right? If you don't have that experience, it's very difficult to trust them. And I think as well,
Yeah,
learning to just some basic things about how Satan speaks and how God speaks, right? Where what I always come back to is like, okay, so Satan is a liar. Satan comes to steal. Satan comes to kill. Satan comes to destroy. He knows better than most Christians, strangely enough, that he can't actually snatch anybody out of God's
right.
hand. He knows that. He knows the rules that are established by Christ through him dying on the cross, that Satan knows. He doesn't have the power to actually take anyone out of God's family. That power he doesn't have. Like I said, tragically, many Christians still believes he has that kind of power. But he's then on to plan B, which is to steal, kill, and destroy. How does he do that? What's he trying to steal, kill, and destroy? Joy, peace,
Yeah,
purpose, vision, mission, clarity, all of that. He's wanting to
yep.
destroy all of what's good, all of what is of God. He wants to destroy that. How does he do that? Very often come back to Romans 8:1, where Paul says, hey, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Satan, of course, does not actually respect that. So he will condemn us. So often people hear things that they think are from God, but when it's based on condemnation, when it's filled with attacks
Hmm.
on their character and who they are as people, you should know. I'm sorry, you should know because the scriptures are clear. That is not from God. That is from the accuser of the brethren. That's from Satan himself. God never attacks my identity as a child of God, even when he directs,
Right.
even when he redirects, even when my friend from Denmark there the other day, where God showed me, yeah, Torben, she's right. She is spot on. You have not been kind to these people. You should have responded like that to her. And there's these other people as well, by the way. But he didn't attack my character. He didn't
Right.
attack my identity. God would never do
Right.
that, right?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned like placing your trust in the character of God, and in His faithfulness, and like, and it is learned, and it is something that grows. I mean, when I like going all the way back, Torben, to what we were first talking about when we first met, I remember the very first time I heard the voice of the Lord, and I just remember so clearly Him speaking and inviting me into something, and honestly, his word, it was not a word of condemnation, but it was filled with it was a word of correction,
Hmm.
but it was filled with so much love and
Yeah,
care for me that I knew it was him. Like never heard it before, but I knew it was him.
yeah,
Um, and and I remember in that moment, I told the Lord, I said, I know what you're asking me to do,
hmm,
and I just said very honestly, I said, Father, I don't have faith.
hmm,
I do not have the faith right now to say yes to this.
hmm.
And said, will you grow my faith?
Yeah,
And praying that prayer, man, that is talk about people talk about dangerous prayers to pray. That was a dangerous prayer to pray
yeah,
if you're praying it and mean it, right? Like
yeah,
grow my faith. And what happened was the Lord took me on a journey of growing my faith, but also introducing me for the first time in my life to actually who He is.
yeah,
Um, in such a way that as I began to know Him, I began to understand how He moves and how He operates.
yeah,
Like God is not a distant God that doesn't want to be understood. Like I think we get in our minds sometimes because His ways are not our ways and His thoughts are not our thoughts. We think, well, then that means I can't understand Him.
yeah.
That's just not true. His ways are not your ways, so he's not going to do things the way that you would do them. His thoughts are not your thoughts. They're so much higher than your thoughts. But it doesn't mean that you can't understand who he is and how he moves and operates. So as I got to know him and understand his ways and how he, like, what is the path of God, I was able, because I knew him, to position myself in his path. And as I position myself in the pathway of God, I can actually see him when he comes on the horizon and follow in his way. Does that make sense? So,
It
like, for
does.
me,
It
man,
does.
like Psalm 25, like Psalm 25 is what kept coming to my heart and coming to my mind. It's make known to me. This is verse 4. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your path. Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. And for you, I wait all the day long. Like that scripture for me, man, was so important because it was like, oh, God, I need to know you.
Yeah.
And the more that I know you, the more I can understand your ways.
Yeah.
The more I understand your ways, the more I can position myself in your pathways to watch
Yeah.
and to wait.
I love that. And it's interesting how, again, of course, those are some of those same prayers that God put in me. Again, for me, I was 15. I remember that it was a simple worship chorus just about, I want to know you. That's my deepest longing. That's what I want, right? And it certainly looked different than I thought it would look like at 15. But I just maybe just want to land on that just as an encouragement to anyone listening. I think as well, there's so many people, especially as they get older, people get more scared seemingly when they get older. I'm one of those weirdos who get more sort of crazy as I get older, but I know that's not necessarily the norm. I'll be one of those weirdo 85-year-olds sitting in a nursing home just shouting all sorts of crazy things out there, and they'll not know what to do with me. But don't be so afraid. Don't be so afraid.
Yeah.
Take a step. Like, yeah, talk to people around you. Hey, God is calling me to this here. Does that seem completely insane? Have some people that you trust, walk with God, that know Jesus well, but take a chance. Don't be so afraid. Don't be so afraid. Don't let fear stop you from taking a step. There's so many people who are so paralyzed by fear, paralyzed of, oh, what if I do the wrong thing then? And then what? I've made lots of bad, dumb choices in my lifetime, but as the song goes, again, yeah, God can then use that as well. God
That's right.
can use my nonsense and my bad choices and things I probably shouldn't have done, and he'll utilize it anyway. All of it works together for good. All the good, bad, ugly, and different, no matter what it is you've done. I just encourage more people to take a chance.
Yeah.
If you have a sense God is calling you to something, and hey, this is not morally wrong, or it doesn't go against, as you mentioned there, Andrew, it doesn't go against anything in the written scripture. God is not going to call you to something that goes against something that's directly written in the Bible. He's not going to do that.
Yeah.
But if he's inviting you to do something, to take that step, whatever that may look like, let's go for it.
Yeah.
And part of what I do, of course, as well, and we'll just end just with that encouragement. If you've listened to these a couple of podcasts here and you're like, hey, I would love to learn more about this. I still have questions. I have a lot of questions. I want to follow Jesus in the kind of way that you guys are describing. Hey, could we talk about this? Yes, that's what I do. That's what coaching counseling is. It's nothing wildly complicated, as Andrew will know. I'm the same person no matter what I do. Again, I don't change. I'm just me. I'd love to talk to you. Love to help you with this. Love to help you get to know Jesus in a way where you following him and you experiencing him in your life, in your friendship, in your marriage, in all of it is just a natural part of life, as it should be. That is Jesus' desire for all of us. There's none of us that are in some sort of superstar club here. This is for all of us to experience the living Christ making a difference in every aspect of our lives, right? So yeah, shoot me an email, check out the website, transformativetruth.com, or email me at trj@transformativetruth.com. Would love to connect with you. But Andrew, thank you so very, very much for taking time to come here and appear in this podcast. We'll split it up in a couple of episodes, and people will have a chance to listen to that. Do you have anything final you would like to say here to our listeners here?
Yeah, I'll echo what you said. I think heaven seems to respond to hearts filled with faith. So take a step, trust that he's going to show up. Heaven responds to faith, and it's beautiful. I think the Lord, he gives invitations for us to walk in his ways. And when we do, he shows up.
Perfect. Great word to land on. Andrew, I'll see you for lunch in a couple of weeks. This is Transformative Truth Podcast, and I'll catch you on the next one.